I'm going to call this joint meeting of the Urbana Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission, the Urbana Sustainability Advisory Commission, and the Urbana Plan Commission to order. Rather than a roll call, I think we'll just have everybody introduce themselves since this is a study session. People are still filtering in. Find a chair, any chair. Not those. Oh, I'm sorry, not any chair. There's two right over here.
I had to find the ones.
So if we could start there. I'm sorry, I don't know you, but
You will.
yes,
Todd Rusk, Sustainability Advisory Commission.
great.
Morgan Johnston, Sustainability Advisory Commission.
Hi, I'm Steve Wald with the Sustainability Advisory Commission.
I'm Brandon Bowersack.
I'm Andrew Stump with the Sustainable Advisory Commission.
Maria Ryan with the Sustainability Advisory Commission.
And we start with Ms. Hoa.
Audrey Ishii with the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission.
Corey Buttry with the Plan Commission.
David Trail with the Plan Commission.
I'm Tyler Fitch, I'm the chair of the Plan Commission.
Bart Bartles with the Sustainable Advisory Commission.
Susan Jones, Bike Ped and Advisory Commission.
Craig Schunkweiler, Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission.
Rachel Valenga, Sustainability.
Great. We have enough people to proceed. So if everybody's settled in, I will introduce Interim Planning Manager Jeff Engstrom, who will introduce our presenters for the evening. Do we have any communications prior to that?
No, sir.
All right, then we have a study session, a presentation of the Champaign County Regional Planning Commission on the draft 2040 Long Range Transportation Plan.
All right, we have tonight with us members of CUOTS, Rita Black and Ashley McLaughlin will be presenting. The Long Range Transportation Plan, Sustainable Choices 2040. They previously presented to this joint body a few months ago. They had a partial draft to present, and now they've got a complete draft, so they're going to fill us in on the things that we missed last time. And this, the final draft is up for review on the CUOTS website. I'm sure they'll tell us the URL and stuff like that. So the public comment period is coming up to an end, and we would like to get any final input from the city's commissions here as they move towards the final draft. So here's Rita and Ashley.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Rita Black. We were here about 2 or 3 months ago, and we presented the draft plan. We didn't have completed the plan at that time. Today will be presented the last 5 chapters of the plan. And I want to go over the purpose of the long-range transportation plan. We started developing the plan beginning on July 1st of 2012. Then we have been working on the plan for the last 28 months. And we want to be done soon. The LRTP, or the Long Range Transportation Plan, is a federally mandated document that we, as the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the Champaign-Urbana urbanized area, have to prepare every 5 years. Every 5 years, we have a deadline for submitting a plan that is updated. And the main purpose of the plan is to show how the community is going to evolve in the next 25 years regarding the transportation system. And also, once we submit the plan and the plan is approved by IDOT, by Federal Highway and Federal Transit, then we have the go-ahead for receiving federal funding for transportation planning projects and also for transportation infrastructure projects. Then it's a really important document for the community because without the approval of this plan, we will not be able to get funding in the next 5 years. The LRTP does not replace any particular transportation plan adopted by each jurisdiction who is member of QWATS. Basically, what the plan does is to put together a common vision for development of the transportation system in the future and identify those major regional transportation projects that perhaps in the future will require federal funding. And then this is the way that the Federal Highway Administration is made aware that there will be projects coming up that will require federal funding, and those projects have been discussed, have been approved by the community. The document, as Jeff mentioned, has been out for public comment period since October 1st. Tomorrow will be the last day of the public comment period. We have already gone present to different boards. We already got approval from the MTD board, from the Champaign County board, the Village of Savoy board. We presented to the city of Champaign, to the committee of the whole. We'll be getting the resolution of approval in November sometime. And this is the last board that we are presenting today. Then hopefully you will treat us well. Then we have Ashley that will be presenting.
Oops, sorry. Good evening, everybody. Let me just pull up my little presentation here. Okay, so when we were here in June, we went over basically these first two sections here, the background data and the existing conditions. These are kind of the four main components of the long-range plan. The last two sections, planning for the future and the 2040 vision, are really what I'm going to be covering today. So background data was really just information about the federal requirements and the community. Existing conditions was our data collection about the existing transportation network, as well as we did a lot of public outreach. About 20 public events, public meetings, and outreach events with our community conversations bus to get user experience input about the transportation network. And with all of that, with all of our background information and our existing conditions data, we then started to plan for the future. So the main components of this particular goal were we had some public visioning meetings. We collected input from our member agencies about what projects they were thinking about for the 25-year planning horizon. We looked at reference studies. So as Rita mentioned, there are already, of course, plans in place at the local level for individual agencies. And so there's a lot of those plans that are relevant to the long-range transportation plan that we reviewed. And then with all of that information, we came up with some pillars, kind of some main concepts to guide our long-range plan and our vision for the future. And then we also have a suite of statistical models in our office that we ran to help us kind of quantify what will the impacts be of different development concepts and specific projects. So to begin, we had 4 visioning meetings. One was open to the general public, one was directed at business developers, one was specifically for youth, and one was for social service employees that work largely in the rural areas. The main questions were, where will we be in 2040 if we do nothing? And also, what would you like to see for your community in 2040? And so we talked about some of the discrepancies between those two answers that people had. For these meetings, we hired an outside facilitator to pose the questions and guide the conversation, to kind of remove ourselves and our own personal biases from the conversation. And then we also hired a graphic recorder that drew these posters. He essentially was drawing the conversation live. And so it was a tool to engage the members at the meeting. It was also a way for them to see their input tangibly recorded. And then it also served as a great record after the fact for people that couldn't make the meeting, and also for staff analysis. We were able to look at all 4 posters and identify where some overlaps were and where there were some differences between the different priorities of the different groups. Next, we collected input from our member agencies. I know you can't read this text is very small, but to give you an idea of what this is, the agency submitted 42 total projects all around the region, projects that are currently unfunded that they wanted to see happen before 2040. And so with all of this list of projects, we divided it into time periods, and then we got public input on what members of the public thought would be most important to them to be completed before 2040. So the dots to the right, the projects are listed on the left, and then the colored dots on the right indicate votes that people had. That's just a picture of inside our community conversations bus of some people voting. And there are different numbers of projects in each of the groups, as you can see. So, of course, if there aren't as many projects, they get a lot more votes. But those tallies were normalized so that we could then compare and figure out what the top priorities were throughout the community.
Did projects categorized by decade while people voted? Did they see that, or were they grouped
Yes. So this is
afterwards?
the exact poster that people saw. And so they were divided from 2015 to 2020, like very short-term projects, 2021 to 2030, and then 2031 to 2040.
Thanks.
And then this is not an exhaustive list, but this is a list of some of the many local documents that are relevant to the long-range transportation plan that we took into consideration when developing kind of our goals and objectives for the future. And then here is a list of our planning pillars. So like I mentioned, we used all of our previous data collection, all of our public input on existing conditions, the priorities that came out of the visioning meetings, the agency priorities. We also looked back at we do an annual report card to track the progress of our current LRTP that's currently in effect. We keep track of all of those goals and objectives and progress toward them, and so we also referenced those. And we came up with these 6 planning pillars to guide our document and vision for the future. Safety and security, balanced development, multimodal connectivity, accessibility and affordability, healthy neighborhoods, and resilient economy. And all of those pictures are from the visioning meeting posters. These pillars are elaborated further. I believe it's in Chapter 9 of the full document. And lastly, in the section, we ran our statistical models. And so in order to do that, we had to define some development scenarios that we could work with. So the first scenario we established was what we call traditional development. So this is based on historical patterns of development in the community. As you can see there, this is the road network. The roads in red are from 1914. And then they expand out from there. The roads on the periphery in green are roads that have been built since 1960, I believe. So in this particular scenario, we focus on most of the new development being on open and available land that is cheaper for construction and purchase. It is more expensive, of course, for extending infrastructure, so for roads, for utilities. This also means we had a minimal increase in density in the core in this particular scenario, mostly single-family development, so lower density development on the periphery, and automobile-based transportation. Then in our second scenario, what we call our LRTP 2040 vision scenario, it was really based on the 6 pillars and the feedback we got from the community. So a big focus on improving our existing infrastructure in the core there. So a bigger focus on infill development, which means higher density in the core, more multifamily housing than in the previous scenario, so that infrastructure costs and resource costs are kept down. In this scenario, we also have expanded CUMTD coverage and higher frequency of service. And then we also included a high-speed rail network on that north-south corridor there along the existing Amtrak network, which has an impact on the population and employment for the area. So this is an overview of our models. We have 6 models that we ran in addition to the population and employment projections that we established. So I'm just going to go briefly over what each model kind of shows us. So first we did our population and employment projections. On top we have population in red and orange, and on the bottom we have employment in blue and green. I can tell it's a little bit hard to see from here at least. But in terms of population on the top there, the red line is for the traditional development scenario and the orange line is for the LRTP 2040 vision. They're pretty much the same. There's a slight increase at the end in the 2040 vision scenario, and that's mostly based on implementation of a high-speed rail corridor between sometime around 2035. So that difference, that final difference in employment is just about, or I'm sorry, in population is about 5,000 people. On the bottom here, we have employment, and you can see there's a bigger difference. This bottom line is for the traditional development scenario in blue, and then on top is the LRTP 2040 scenario. Like I said, there's a much bigger difference here. It looks kind of drastic, but essentially what this difference represents in real numbers is a return to an unemployment rate that's closer to 2007 than the current unemployment rate. So basically regaining the jobs that we lost in the last 5 years or since the 2008 downturn with the implementation of high-speed rail. So the first model, our travel demand model, shows us what we can expect in terms of vehicle miles traveled in the urbanized area and also how mode share might change. So as you can see in the traditional development scenario, all of the numbers have increased, obviously, because population and employment have increased. In this, comparing that with the sustainable choices scenario, we see that, let's see, so there are more people driving to work and more population, so all of these numbers are slightly increased, but transit has increased pretty drastically with increased frequency and increased coverage. Bicycling and pedestrian or walking has also increased. And then in terms of, this is just trying to graphically give you an idea of that difference. So when thinking about just the additional people since our baseline of 2010, this is the traditional development scenario where we have an increase in transit, biking, walking, and then over here you can see those increases are larger in each one of those categories, particularly in walking and transit. So next we have our land use evaluation and assessment model, and this essentially just distributes our population and employment projections given the development parameters that we define for it. So in the traditional development scenario, I'm losing my way here. On this side is on the left side is the traditional development scenario, and on the right side is the LRTP 2040 vision scenario. So you can't see a drastic difference here, particularly with population, and population is on top, I should clarify, because there's not a huge difference. There's only a 5,000 person difference, but at the same time you can tell that some of the population is focused more in the core than it is on the periphery, as in the traditional development scenario. For employment, on the bottom, this is the traditional development scenario, and it's much more clear to see that the employment is more concentrated in the core of the community. So our next model is called social cost of alternative land development scenarios. It gives us an idea of housing unit estimates, infrastructure costs, and resource use. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail. We do have our modeling experts in the room if you have specific questions or want more detail later. But just to give you an idea, this shows that, for instance, over here you can clearly see that multifamily units are much larger in the Sustainable Choices 2040 scenario than in the traditional development scenario because of our focus on infill development and increasing density. That also keeps infrastructure and resource costs down. So the green bars here are for Sustainable Choices 2040, and these are all per capita numbers. And so per capita, new infrastructure costs are much lower, as are energy use and water use. Next, we have our motor vehicle emission simulator that gives us an idea of how emissions change over time. With this one, essentially with more people and more population and more employment, we're going to have more emissions because more people are going to be driving, although per capita, you'll see here in this center section, per capita the rate is much lower because we do see a pretty large mode shift to transit, biking, and walking in the Sustainable Choices 2040 scenario. But overall, there is a slight increase in each of these aggregate numbers given higher population and higher employment. The local accessibility and mobility analysis, this is actually at a local level. All of the previous models we talked about are all at the county level. And then we have two new tools for analysis at the local level. So since we have collected so much data, we're trying to use it to get a finer level of detail of what mobility and accessibility looks like in different neighborhoods with different resources. And so these results, which again we can elaborate on further later, actually divide up the community into different planning areas and give a much better idea or a much closer idea of what the transportation network looks like there and what kinds of services they have access to in terms of the built environment and also the public input. So we try to measure mobility factors and accessibility factors overlaid with the transportation network and the public comments received during the LRTP outreach. Again, I'm going to leave the detail for the people that know more about it.
We have, if you want, after this is done, a presentation explaining in detail these models, because I remember last time that we were here, you were really interested in the detail of the models. Then if you want, we have another presentation about the models. But we don't want to lose the sight of getting the plan moving along.
So that's our local accessibility and mobility analysis. The other model we have developed recently is our health impact assessment. And this looks at the relationship between the transportation system, the built environment, and spatialized trends of different health and illnesses in the community. So our first model that we have developed with this is based on obesity data, spatialized incidences of obesity overlaid with the transportation network and other built environment factors to give us an idea of what the relationship is between those and how we can maximize our resources and improve mobility through active transportation use in the community. So that's our models. Moving on. The 2040 vision. So with all of this data, how do we define a vision? We have some project maps here and a funding summary. So in terms of our overall conceptual vision, I already showed this map, but I'll talk about it in a little bit more detail here. This is kind of a summary of our Sustainable Choices 2040 vision. So we have three major focuses. The first one is accessibility in the core, that's in green. So that's a focus on more complete streets and increasing access and active transportation in the core of the community. It also includes the MCORE project that was recently granted funding at CUMTD. Next, we have increasing mobility through an enhanced arterial system, and that's in blue. And that's essentially also complete streets around the arterial of the community to facilitate safety and active transportation, as well as freight in this enhanced arterial. So by establishing a better freight route and places where freight can go safely and not kind of overly damage the streets or cause additional congestion or safety issues for pedestrians and bikes, that's part of our bigger picture enhanced arterial system. And then we also have regional connectivity here with our interstate system, our Rails to Trails projects, and the high-speed rail corridor that's proposed for 2035. We also have Willard Airport here as a placeholder, but we don't have specific recommendations for Willard until the task force releases their own findings. So then we have different vision maps. This first one is our messiest one. It is the pedestrian and bicycle vision. So pedestrian and bicycle projects aren't necessarily of regional significance, or generally a lot smaller in scale, and the funding sources are different. But given that this is a big part of our transportation network, we wanted to at least include them in the plan. So what we've done is given you this very busy map of all of the bicycle and pedestrian projects that are in plans before 2040. And so it's essentially a compilation of all of the projects from the Greenways and Trails Plan, Urbana Bicycle Master Plan, Pedestrian Plan for Champaign, etc. But since there's so many of them, we don't actually go into detail on them. It's basically just a representation that we can then direct people to the actual plans with greater detail. So the projects themselves, there's over 700 of them, are in an appendix in the LRTP, but there's just so many we don't go into detail in the main body of the document. Next, we have our transit, rail, and air vision. There are 7 main projects here in our transit, rail, and air vision. The first one being the high-speed rail corridor that we mentioned. The second one being increased Amtrak frequency to accommodate the increased ridership. The third would be the MCORE project that we just referenced that CUMTD was recently granted money for, the high-capacity transit network. Fourth are transit hubs that essentially would serve as satellite stations for CUMTD so that they can more efficiently serve the surrounding communities off campus. Fifth is the CUMTD service area, making it coterminous with the urbanized area. As you can see, this dark orange line is the CUMTD boundary, but there are still areas of the community that are outside that boundary that are currently not serviced. Number 6 is the Illinois terminal expansion. So assuming, or not assuming, but if high-speed rail were to come, the Illinois terminal would certainly be expanded to accommodate a rail station and also additional transit facilities within the community and potentially additional commercial or public space for the downtown Champaign area. And then 7, Willard Airport here, like I said, is really just a placeholder at this point until the task force comes out with its own findings. Lastly, we have our roadway vision. So I'm going to go through the legend here and then zoom in a little bit on the core, but I won't go through each project individually. But as you can see here, we have some projects in Mahomet that I'm not going to talk about. Mahomet is, they have a different funding source. They're not technically a CUATS member agency, but they are in our planning area. So we have included some projects from their transportation plan that I believe is going to be approved sometime in the next month. It's a draft plan at this point. We've included them just for reference. Otherwise, we have here the projects in green are the MCOR projects that we've already talked about. The projects in red are actually the projects that the CUATS member agencies gave to us that were then voted on by the public. And so the projects in red are actually the top 10 public priorities of the agency projects. So agency projects, but publicly prioritized. Next, we have first, I'll go with the blue. So the projects in blue are projects that are carryovers from the 2035 LRTP. So as part of our visioning process, the LRTP working group revisited the previous LRTP to see what projects had already been done and which ones were still a priority. So the blue ones were deemed still a priority. The yellow and orange ones are ones that are priorities from the previous plan that are currently in progress or ongoing. And then we have left over this one pink project here that is actually just a proposed corridor study. It's not a specific project that is planned, but a corridor study has been proposed given that there's some overlapping interests, jurisdictional interests in that particular road section. So to give you just a tiny bit more detail about the red projects, again, these were projects that were given to us by the member agencies, and then the members of the public voted on them. So we have 2 projects included in here that are focused on increasing intersection safety, and then the other 8 are really focused on complete streets. So a big priority among the public, both in the existing conditions feedback and in the public project priorities, had to do with having more complete streets, closing the gaps in the pedestrian network and the bike network. So lastly here, we have our funding. It's not really a funding plan, but one of the requirements of the long-range plan is to include fiscally constrained projects. The only projects that we can consider fiscally constrained are those that have relatively secure funding sources. And so for that reason, the only projects included in this map that we consider fiscally constrained are the ones in the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program. That covers fiscal years 15 through 18, and basically it's a compilation of all of the projects that have been approved by the local agencies in the community and have funding secured. So all of those projects are represented here in a map and are detailed in the plan itself, in the plan document itself. The total for all of these projects right now is about $145 million. I also forgot to mention, also included in this map are transportation projects that are in the CIPs for Urbana and Champaign. Champaign has a 10-year CIP and Urbana has a 5-year CIP. Those transportation projects are also included in this plan, though they're not included in the funding total of $145 million. That's just a small close-up. And then we also have bike and pedestrian fiscally constrained projects. And these are projects that were confirmed by member agencies to already have funding. So these are part of the overall plan that we already gave you, but that already have funding guaranteed through a variety of sources. So then for our future funding projections, we had to estimate based on historic trends and current funding sources how our funding would look into the future. So these estimates, all I'm really going to point out here is that the expenditures are quite a bit less than the revenues because, again, the only guaranteed funding or funding that we already have allotted is that which is already included in the Transportation Improvement Program, fiscal years 15 through 18. And so we haven't, we don't assign funding to any of our vision projects. This is really just an estimate of what we have available in the future, minus the expenditures we already know will happen because they're documented in the Transportation Improvement Plan through fiscal year 18, if that makes sense. And then the asterisk just says that the MCOR grant for CUMTD is not included in that total because they have been, those funds have been approved, but they haven't yet been appropriated. So that is all I have. What we've been doing since September are these member agency presentations to get support and approval from our member agencies. Like Rita and Jeff already mentioned, the public comment period has been through the month of October. We've gotten some feedback from members of the public on the document and the vision. And then final approval will be from the RPC board and the CUATS policy and technical committees at the beginning of December. I'm going to talk about the model.
Well, I don't know if you want to ask questions first, if you want to see the presentation about modeling, how do you want to?
I think we'll break here and ask some questions about the substance of the plan and then maybe follow up with a fairly brief overview of the model.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Ingstrom.
Oh, we were just wondering if you could delve a little deeper into the specific roadway projects, especially in Urbana.
Sure. Do you want to do that? Do you want me to? Okay. Okay. So for Urbana specifically, like I said, we have the MCOR projects. Those are on Green Street, 2 sections of Green Street, Wright Street, White Street, and Armory Avenue. Those include, well, you could talk more specifically about what those include.
Well, for Green Street, that is Urbana, what is being proposed is to have exclusive bus lanes and also exclusive bike lanes as well as having automobile lanes. Then basically we'll have a section with lanes for each mode of transportation separately. That's the idea on Green Street, at least between Wright Street and Lincoln Avenue. On Green Street, east of Lincoln Avenue, the idea is to have bike lanes and then the automobile and bus lanes together. That's the idea for Green Street. The other project that is in here is the extension of Florida Avenue. That's a project that has been in place for a long time, but is subject to development on that area, and that's why it hasn't been completed. The other one is the extension of Olympian Drive from Lincoln Avenue up to US 45 once we get development on that area, if that development occurs. And then we have completing Illinois 130, what has been done so far up to the extension of Florida Avenue, going south up to Curtis Road. And then improving the section of Curtis Road from Illinois 130 up to US 45. We haven't decided yet what kind of design, but we know that at this time it's really unsafe for anyone driving or biking on that roadway because the section is a rural section that is not safe for anyone. Then what is being proposed is to improve Curtis Road that is safer for anyone driving or biking or walking on that roadway. Our proposal in general is for the whole arterial streets that we are proposing surrounding the core area of the community to have complete streets and having those arterials being safer, particularly, for example, in the case of Champaign on Rising Road, we had a fatality last year a teenager was killed on that roadway because the roadway is not safe. Then we are concerned about safety, and that's why we are proposing on improving those roadways, making those safer, having a better design that is complete straight, and then we'll have basically more freight traffic moving on those roadways connecting to the main arterials that we already have in the community, like Windsor Road, connecting to Windsor, connecting to University, connecting to Prospect, connecting to Mattis, connecting to Florida, connecting to Lincoln, that instead of having the heavy traffic driving on the small roadways inside the community, the traffic will be distributed in better way.
The only thing I'll point out is that the Florida Avenue extension is a carryover from the 2035 plan, but it was also a public priority project in our voting process.
Yeah. Any questions regarding the projects in Urbana?
Ms. Johnson?
I just would like to know what the circle is at.
The blue circle on Illinois 130 is when we did the Illinois 130 corridor study some years ago. There was discussion about having a future interchange on that area. It's not being defined, the location. It's just a need to have an interchange, considering that this is the future development area for the city of Urbana. Then if that area gets developed, we see a need for having a better connection with 74 on that area, but it hasn't been defined yet.
Ms. Stake?
Well, what I was wondering was about how much are you going to consider the rail? Because we know we have too many cars, we know that. And there should be, even in the city, some way for people to have, to go with the rail. It seems to me that we're really in a bad situation right now, because I've seen people I've gone to many cities, and they're just stacked with cars, and you can't even drive very fast there. You're caught. We need ways now of taking care of the way we move better than cars.
Right.
And I don't know what are we doing in Urbana. I had some information here from Japan. Japan has started to do a lot, and other countries have started to do much more than we are. So I'm real concerned about the transportation for people, and I think that we shouldn't be putting in more roads. No, and not more cars. We should be going more to something where a lot of people can get on one thing and go. So I don't know whether you're considering this in Urbana or not.
We are not considering rail in the community as another mode that will expand. The way that we are considering rail is increasing the number of trains going through the community. With the current Amtrak service, we are asking for more Amtrak service in the community, and also promoting high-speed rail. But as a mode of transportation in the community, we are not proposing that, because there are a lot of limitations at the federal level to provide funding for this kind of projects. We made an attempt several years ago, and it didn't go well. Then what we are proposing in terms of moving people is switching people from cars to biking and walking, and improving significantly bus service in the community. We are proposing 4 different areas where we'll have transit hubs, and then from there, those areas will be better served. And we are increasing proposing increase the frequency of the service on several routes that already exist in the community.
I think the biking and walking is great, but not more cars.
Ms. Ishii?
Yeah,
Yes, I see a lot of interest in infill development and so on, but then I see this concern that, oh, cars are using Curtis Avenue. Yes, they are using Curtis Avenue. I've noticed that myself. While Windsor Avenue has tons and tons of capacity, it's sitting there empty, and Curtis Avenue is becoming increasingly crowded. I wonder why that is. I think it might have something to do with the convenience of having a much higher speed limit on Curtis Avenue. And if we're really interested in infill development and not developing a ring road and having, urban expansion and urban sprawl, I wonder why we don't just consider lowering the speed limit on Curtis and making it a lot less convenient to use that to cut around the city. I mean, obviously, the university doesn't want to see that turn into a 4-lane highway. Obviously, if we're going to make it really convenient to go there, that's where the development's going to go. And that's going to be in exact opposition to everything that we're giving lip service to. So I don't know why we don't just control Curtis Avenue and return it to the rural character it was just a few years ago, until people realized, hey, I can speed up by going down to Curtis and skip that annoying speed limit on Windsor.
We don't control the speed on any of the roadways. That's the jurisdiction of each municipality or township. Then we don't control the speed. And we are not proposing a 4-lane roadway on Curtis Road, as I mentioned it. What we are proposing is to improve the roadway to be safer and to include facilities for all the different modes of transportation. Then we are not proposing 4-lane roadways. We are not proposing to increase the speed. We are just proposing to improve the section, to make it safer, and to be able to handle all different modes of transportation.
Ms. Hoyle.
Yeah, I have a question and a comment. My question is, one of the things that I didn't see in the presentation is our current mode share and our future mode share.
The existing mode share is in the existing conditions section that we presented back when we were here in June.
Before.
Yeah.
But Urbana has, what, about 35% of its trips are non-auto, work trips are non-auto, is that correct?
Close to, yeah.
And what, and the American average for non-auto work trips is?
Well, I don't know if the American average is, but we're certainly up there.
We're significantly, yeah.
It's usually 5 to 10%, and we are between 30 and 35.
Yeah,
in
that's
Urbana only.
Right. But in the community overall, the mode share changes because we're averaging in Savoy, and in the future, we're going to have to average in Tolono as well.
But we separated here. We
You
have
did,
for
okay.
each community the mode share.
Okay. And then I had a couple of thoughts about that. I would like to say that as someone who's been on the steering committee since 2004, I feel like our long-range transportation has been a foundational document in changing our development patterns. Since I have been here, I moved here in 2001, we have had significant decrease in fringe development and fringe roadway building, as you see in our report cards and our performance measures, and significant increase in infill and redevelopment. Our densities have by and large increased overall. They kind of go up and down. And so I think that this document had a very large role in that, and getting it passed the first time was a little bit of a trick, as those of us who were involved remember. There was a lot of opposition. My understanding is, in terms of your presenting to other bodies, you did have comments from other entities in Kuwats that they felt the plan was too oriented toward bicycling, it was too oriented toward transit, and they complained about that. And Urbana is complaining about road building, so clearly we have a diversity of opinion on the Kuwats body, and in order for us to pass a plan, it's clear that we all have to compromise to some degree or another in order to get our federal dollars. And I wanted to add in too that what the progress that we have made in the last 12, 13 years has been noted. Just recently, we came in number 4 on a list of car-independent university neighborhoods. You can live here without a car, and we have thousands of students showing up here who do not bring their cars anymore. And Smart Growth America issued a report called Measuring Sprawl in 2014, and Champaign-Urbana ranked number 4 nationally as a smart growth community. we're not a community that likes to rest on our laurels. I don't think any of us are satisfied with that, because by American standards, we're doing well. But by international, I guess comparing us to European countries, we have not done very well. But part of that is unfortunately a result of our funding and governmental structure and how the money is siloed into transit, road building, rail, airports. So I wanted to just draw attention to our mode share, and then what our goals for our mode share are in the plan in the future, and how we're going to accomplish that, I think, is fairly represented in here. One last comment, as someone who bicycles regularly on Curtis Road and some of the other roads you show on the fringe, people are driving at excessive speeds. Those roads were not built to support that speed. And as someone who's out there bicycling, I watch them very closely in my rearview mirror, because they are going too fast. And what happens, like the young man who was killed, is because the roadway is not designed for the speeds they're going, they flip off the road. Lowering the speed limit as a transportation planner, I can tell you, is not effective in lowering speeds. We have to change the roadway design. So I would hope that as we look at those roads, that the design be implicitly set up to provide for lower speeds, so that we increase safety, at least with reducing speed.
Mr. Bowersox.
Yeah, I wanted to just ask a little more about the Curtis Road projects, and maybe this is something actually that Jeff or some of the Urbana city planners want to speak to a bit, but I guess I feel a little bit like Audrey does, perhaps, that for now, for 2014, Windsor Road feels like an adequate arterial on the south side of our community. And if Curtis Road immediately became a big new arterial, that might, if it happened too soon, encourage leapfrog development and encourage sprawl. But given that this is a 2040 plan, I can understand that perhaps by 2040, Curtis Road, will be the edge of the community, and that upgrades in time are important. So I guess my question is to Urbana's planners, and maybe to the Plan Commission or to our planning staff, are we, at least as a city, adequately prepared that our land use plans, our comp plan, our own infill priorities can control the development there, so that even if Curtis gets an upgrade, that doesn't automatically unleash a bunch of development patterns that we don't want, and that Curtis Road could be upgraded in time, and that development could be compact and contiguous over time? Do we have the adequate controls as a city, above and beyond this LRTP document, to make our south side growth sustainable?
Yeah, we actually do have that built in, just by the fact that we don't have sewer service very far south of Windsor. So it'll take a very large capital project to extend sewer service down there, and we'll wait until we're actually ready for that. And plus our documents do call for the growth inside and the more densification. So we kind of both incentivize that through our plans and try to limit the leapfrog growth as well.
Ms. Ishii.
Yes. One of the things I'm concerned about is the idea that this is a plan, this is the LTRP for 2040. The reference documents that I see in here are the Urbana Comprehensive Plan of 2005 and the Bike Plan of 2008 and the Champaign Plan of 2008. So what I think is happening is these transportation plans are leapfrogging our other plans. I don't see any reference in here at all to our climate change action plan. In fact, the two plans don't appear to be talking to each other. I don't see transportation greenhouse gases in the climate change plan at all, as far as what part is that, nor is greenhouse gases ever mentioned in the LTRP. I mean, it's vaguely alluded to that that's something to consider, but I don't see any goals like there are in the Climate Action Plan of Urbana, which actually specifically states what mode share we want. And while it does lay out, what our energy consumption sectors are, it doesn't have transportation there. So how are these two talking to each other, and is the LTRP in fact leapfrogging the best efforts of communities to plan and control their destiny by using things that are completely out of date? We're about to issue a new bike plan, but nowhere is that referenced in here. Instead, they're using one from 2008. I mean, I think leapfrogging is exactly what's happening here.
The Urbana Bicycle Master Plan that is currently being done is not included. The proposed projects are not included because the plan hasn't been presented or approved by the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee or by the City Council. Our policy is until the plan is approved by the corresponding agency, we don't take that plan and include it in other plans. We took into consideration the involvement that was done with the Urbana Bicycle Master Plan 2014 as part of this plan too, but we are not including the new projects that are in the 2014 bike plan because it hasn't been approved. Regarding the Climate Action Plan, we provided comments to Scott over there regarding the proportion of bike trips and the goals that we have for the community regarding the bike trips in the future. And we also talk about the greenhouse gas emissions. The problem is that the long-range transportation plan is a regional plan. It's not just a plan for the city of Urbana. Then our goals need to be more regional, that need to include Champaign, Urbana, Savoy, Tolono, Bonneville. It's not just for the city of Urbana, but we take into consideration those plans. We use the 2008 comprehensive plan because that's the latest plan that we have from the city of Urbana. There is no other plan recently done as a comprehensive plan for the city of Urbana.
Mr. Dickinson.
Yeah, just another note. Looking through the LRTP, it really, there's nothing in it that's not already mentioned in our 2005 comprehensive plan. These are all things that we worked on. We had a tremendous effort for that plan over a few years, 2003 through 2005. And so really that effort was our major push. The comprehensive plan only gets updated every decade or so. The previous one was 1982, I believe. So we feel CUATS is really taking our plans into account. And Rita mentioned they can't really formally include plans that we haven't yet adopted. But one thing to mention is while they were collecting input for the LRTP, RPC was in parallel collecting input that we are using in our new bicycle master plan.
I will address that too. I don't know if we have any thoughts of updating the comprehensive plan in the near term. I think we need to think about it, start thinking about it. It's 10 years old. We do adopt other plans, bicycle plan, Greenway and Trails plan, perhaps this plan as sort of, I don't know what the word is that we usually use as not an amendment to the plan, but
agency plans.
Yeah, so, sort of an extension of the plan so that in that way try to keep the plan current until we can update it again. In fact, we have an issue right now with the Greenway and Trails plan, which is kind of on hold because we had some concerns that it was out of sync a little bit in some ways. So the Plan Commission at least constantly looks at these plans and tries to adopt them as it's sort of an extension of our plan in order to try to keep it current until we can get back to it. But I think your point is actually kind of well taken, that things just get out of sync and sometimes plans do jump over each other, which is, I like the statement that this doesn't trump anything that the city of Urbana has planned for. And I think to make that explicit in regional and county plans is very important. Ms. Johnson.
I'd like to know when the next round of the LRTP begins, So that as we're making adjustments to bike plans and climate action plans and other similar things, when would we need to target having them done so that the 2050, or is there, I know there's an update at the 5-year mark, but I don't know, so could you give a little bit about the future for the next round?
We need to get it, the next plan need to be done by 2019. We usually, well, at this time, we started the process 30 months before the plan needed to get approved. And still we feel that it's not enough time. And perhaps next time will be 36 months before the plan needs to be approved.
So when would
That will be January of 14, 15, 17.
I will say too, just to note that I briefly mentioned before we do annual report cards, and so we are checking in with the LRTP and other relevant plans on an annual basis, just to see how well our goals are, just to see if they're still relevant, to see how much progress we're making toward them, if we need to make adjustments to the plan or to our methods that we're using to try to accomplish our goals. So it isn't something that we'll just sit around and we'll look at for guidance every time we need it. We really do visit it on an ongoing basis.
Ms. Hoyle?
I had a couple of more questions. Do we currently have designated truck routes?
No.
That was something that we called for in the last LRTP, isn't it?
Yes, and it is in this LRTP. One of the strategies that we want to see in place is to develop a freight plan and then designate freight routes for the community.
And what has kept us from moving forward with that?
Funding.
That's what I was afraid of. So one of the other questions I had was that on our report cards we have new roadways, and they have been being built primarily in the existing municipal boundaries. It said more than 50% are constructed, improved, or annexed in municipal boundaries. And I wondered, because constructed, improved, or annexed, what those definitions are, and do we then have by category which ones were improved? I mean, do we know that? Is that part of the breakdown?
We know that, but we don't put all those details on the report card, but we have that information.
Well, I think it might be helpful for this conversation to know how much of that is actually new road building, because based on what I have seen since I moved here, there's been significant reduction in new road building.
Yeah.
But it's hard to tell from looking, when it's all lumped into improved and constructed and annexed. And when you say annexed, that means it's roads that were already there that were annexed in,
Yeah.
and that added to the mileage in the roadway system.
Exactly.
Okay.
Mr. Trail, did you have something?
Just in our plan, some of them may actually resolve into questions, you never know. The report is, since it's projecting in the future, it's based on a lot of economic assumptions that seem to be sort of the next 25 years will be a lot like the last 25 years. I noticed that, for instance, the projection is that there will actually be more new jobs than there will be new citizens over the next 25 years. I'm sort of questioning how accurate that can be, given the changes in the labor force participation rate in the country. I know that you mentioned that you keyed it somehow off of unemployment, but people are increasingly seeing that unemployment rate doesn't seem to mean much, or at least not what it used to be, because we don't have the labor force participation rate that we used to. A lot of people simply dropped out of the labor force. Having lived in Washington, D.C. for many years, I will tell you that the original conception of the Beltway and the way it was sold was that it would increase safety and put a cap on sprawl. When I look at that plan, I start to see a Beltway forming, and believe me, it's the fastest way to get development completely out of control. And if you want safety, the last place you want to be is on the Beltway in D.C. The section on intercommunity transit looked very weak to me. There's some talk about, the extensive bus network. Not really what you'd call a significant transit option, mostly. If any of you have ever spent any time on a Greyhound bus or a Peter Pan bus, it's not exactly the transit option of first choice. And I would have hoped, especially with, you know, a lot of the language has a commitment to transit and stuff, but I didn't see much commitment to the idea of that you really want to make transit attractive if you want people to use it, and that's going to take investment. The other, I guess, sort of the last two things. I didn't hear any mention of transit-oriented development in this document. I mean, I see a lot of willingness to invest speculatively in road projects. I mean, drive out Curtis Road and it's a big 4-lane, you know, whatever, and there's not a whole lot of anything out there. I can't imagine from this document, you know, I would have expected to see some, you know, idea that, you know, we would like to invest in transit projects that are going to draw development to the areas we want them. If you want infill development, invest in transit and amenities are going to make that infill development attractive and economically viable for developers. And sort of the last, just a general observation, I've only lived here 5 years. My first impression was that, wow, this is a great place because there's no traffic. The road system here seems really overbuilt. I mean, compared to many that I've lived in a number of places around the country, both cities and smaller areas, we have there's lots of roads here. I mean, I remember my neighbors talking about how crowded, how terrible the traffic on Windsor Road is. You know, if there's 4 cars ahead of you at the stop sign, that's traffic, apparently. So that was just sort of I understand there's a long-range commitment in Urbana to transit and to these kind of things, but and I sort of learned from your presentation that a lot of this is driven by highway funding. And so obviously there's a lot of specifics in here about highway funding, and it's driven by the schedule and whatever because that's where the money is. But you know, I know they hate rail. That just seems to be the national, it's like anything that mentions rail you can't get funding for. But you know, even Republicans support bus rapid transit and transit-oriented development. At least they pay lip service to it. I'd love to see a lot more of that sort of thing in a document like this.
Remember, we just received $15.6 million for transit. $15.6 million.
How much did we receive for roads?
More or less than that. We received $250,000 a year for highways. That's the assignation, the federal funding that we receive every year, $250,000. And in 1 year, we received $15.6 million for transit.
For what?
For transit,
That's the MCOR project.
Right.
the MCOR project. Bus rapid transit, basically. Do you want to talk about the
How
projections?
do other countries do this? That you can go to those countries and you can go every place you want to go without a car. You go on the rail. I don't know why we can't do some of this, because it's so much better for people, and it's so much better for the country, everything is better. And why in the world can't we start to think about it some way so that we're not just having cars? And these cars, I'm telling you, I've seen them in every city that I've gone, and there's never any time that we've ever gone straight in. You just are crowded right now. 6 or 7 on this side and 6 or 7 on that side, and we're not going to be able to do that. Sometime we're going to have to change. And I don't know why we don't just start right now to think about what we can do to change this situation where and cars are not good for the country either. It's ridiculous. I don't know. Maybe it's money, but some people have money. We spend money on a lot of things, and we're probably spending on the wrong things. So I don't think
Urbana can change federal funding priorities.
Well,
state.
they're not going to change their mind. That's the trouble. We have to, it has
That
to
doesn't
be
mean
in
that
your
we
mind.
can't do some of the things
It
that are
can't
outlined in
be-
the plan.
It can't be these other things. You have to think about, what are we ever going to do? Because if a little country like Japan can do it, surely the United States could do it.
Well, Urbana's been called the People's Republic, but I don't think that qualifies us as a country.
If I could just
Ms.
touch-
Okay, go ahead.
Anyhow, I'm sorry, but.
No, I don't disagree with you.
I just really am, I just really can't understand it, because.
She was going to address it, and then I'll.
Yeah, if I could just revisit a couple of Mr. Trail's points, I don't want to get too far away from them. With the economic projections, they are pretty optimistic, and I'll be the first to say they are projections. I will say they're more conservative than they were to begin with. So a couple of the tricky things about doing projections in this area are that health industry and the education industry are the two fastest growing industries right now, and those are our two biggest, that's the biggest portion of our employment here. And so we did have to taper off those rates significantly, and despite that, we're still seeing pretty huge numbers. We used all of the regional and national, measures that we could. We measured them against, the few years that we had between our baseline of 2010 and right now. And we did the best we could, and that's what we came up with, and that's what we're working with.
Well, take Ms. Hull's point, and then maybe we'll look at the model a little bit deeper.
Sure. In addition, I did just want to say that I agree, we do have a great road system. We aren't actually proposing any new roads. We are proposing some upgrades, and there are, to correct that, the Florida Avenue extension would be new, and the Olympian Drive extension would be new. Those are both pending development. They would have to be funded by development in those areas, so they couldn't happen before that. But other than that, we are proposing not only no new roads, but no improvements outside of that core area that's defined, by the blue. And I understand that some people would define that closer, but just to clarify, we really are trying to focus what investments we do have in infrastructure that we already have.
All right. Ms. Hoyle had something.
Well, I understand and agree with Bernadine's frustration with how our transportation system is funded and built in this country, and I say to you that you have to look no farther than the last reauthorization of our transportation bill, in which Congress eliminated dedicated funding for Safe Routes to School programming. They eliminated dedicated funding for enhancements, which funds bike and trail. And they tried to eliminate dedicated funding for transit. They failed to eliminate dedicated funding for transit, but they did succeed on the others, and they substantially decreased the amount of funding available for those kinds of things. So we as a community then deal with the fallout of those decisions made at the federal level. I will say our congressman was one of the people who stood up and tried to amend that and stop it, but it was one of the only Republican congressmen who did so, and it was not effective. But I think given the parameters within which we are operating, our plan is going to help us continue to move forward in becoming a community that has transportation choices and housing choices for people that you don't see in other places. We know a lot of people move here now because they don't bring their cars, and they choose to live here because they know they don't have to drive everywhere. And that's something I value and that we moved here for. In 2001, it's only gotten better.
Mr. Bowersock.
Yeah, I wanted to briefly ask about the topic of interstates and interstates being a barrier for pedestrians and bicyclists. I know there was a mention of that in the section, and I really appreciated that, because that is one of the biggest issues we hear, is that interstate projects or bridges over the interstate, or even IDOT projects like University Avenue or whatever, those are some of the intersections, and the interstate projects are some of the biggest barriers where pedestrians have trouble crossing, where the signals aren't good at intersections, or where there are no sidewalks over, a bridge over an interstate, for example. So I appreciated the mention of it in here, and I guess I wondered from your perspective, what else can we do? Because this document really does guide the federally funded projects, which are the projects that in the past have had these barriers. How can our document help so that when projects come, that issue really stays at the forefront of the designers and the IDOT folks and the folks who then put together the plans and can say, gee, we really do want a sidewalk this time when we upgrade this interstate overpass, or we really do want pedestrian countdown signals and islands on University Avenue or something at a big intersection. How else can we bolster that cause so that when the projects happen, we look out for pedestrians and bicyclists?
We do our best in Kiwats, and we have guidelines for installation of accessible pedestrian signals and countdown signals. And one of our performance measures when we do the evaluation every year of the plan is how many new accessible pedestrian signals and countdown signals we have in the community, to point that out. Regarding the bridges, that's the concern that we have, and if you can see the map, those are priority projects for the community, and we made that clear with SIDOT. That is a priority for us and for the community to provide complete streets on the bridges over the interstates. Then we are on that. I just came back from Brazil, and I was amazed of seeing bike facilities along the interstate system there. And we are more developed than Brazil, and we haven't been able to do that.
Yeah.
It's just so frustrating.
Yeah, wow.
Anything further at this time before we take a quick look at the model?
If you want to, you are not forced to. We just brought it because
Mr.
you
Trail
asked
has a
last
burning
time.
desire to see inside this model. No, I'd like to see some of the assumptions.
No? Okay, we're switching then. You guys.
All of the models or just the localized one?
All the models, or can you go quickly?
Just
how much time do you have?
Not a lot, probably. Just a little bit about the assumptions that you made, particularly, I think, in regard to the jobs growth.
But we don't have that model here.
You don't have that one?
No, if you want to see that one, we have all the other 6. But we don't have that
Oh,
one.
sure.
Could we talk a little about some of the assumptions that went into the vehicle mile traveled growth?
Yes,
I
and-
noticed, my point there is nationally, we're still below the total vehicle miles traveled that was, 7 years ago? And showing no signs of increasing at this point. Car ownership is increasingly expensive for everyone. In fact, when I talk to my friends, people talk about walkable communities and things like that. I'll tell you the biggest thing that I hear from people when they want to move somewhere is not only that they can largely do without a car, but they can so do without it, then they don't have to buy one. Because and you have increasingly a number of Americans who cars have become one of the primary means of extracting cash from them.
Yes.
You get pulled over, your car gets towed, you get tickets, in fact, if you look at a lot of the clash in Ferguson had to do with the fact that you have a municipality that by and large doesn't, get its budget by taxing or whatever. It's from those sorts of fines and the interest and other penalties that go with it. So more and more people would just, even if you did not, more and more people are doing nothing more than just, if they had to, get to one. So I'm just wondering if any sort of protections that rely on business as usual, the way the world was, in the era of $4 gas and all that kind of stuff, may not be very accurate for the future.
Yeah. When we developed our model, we took all that into consideration, and you can see that on the results. We have less vehicle mile travel per person in the future predicted by our model than what we have right now. We have an increase on vehicle mile travel because the population and deployment keeps growing, but per person, we have a reduction on vehicle mile travel because we took into consideration the cost of gas, we took into consideration the shift from vehicles to biking, to walking, to buses. We took all that into consideration.
And I understand that, but nationally, it's been 7 years just total aggregate, but per capita, vehicle miles traveled have been falling nationally quite a bit before then.
We know that.
So I'm just sort of looking at the numbers. They seem to track with population, and I just wonder if they're a little bit unreasonably high.
We took all that into consideration when we developed our model, and we are confident on the numbers that we have, but as Ashley said, projections are projections, you never know, but we took all those factors into consideration.
Do you need any further information, or you're good?
And if we have.
There's nothing we could do about the models. I mean, I think.
There's always things you can do about a model.
Oh, I model for
We're
a
not gonna do
living,
any
yeah.
of that Tonight.
We can provide for you, in the appendix of the plan, we have a whole document about the travel demand model, and we have documents for each of the models that we develop. Then we can provide all that information for you, and if you have further questions, you can send those questions to us.
I'd be interested in seeing those. Thank you.
Yeah, and this is the end of the discussion, of course. You'll be coming back to each board individually. Is that correct?
No.
Actually, yeah, just a little update on the procedure. So this is just a study session. We're not voting
Right,
on anything.
right.
But we'll actually be going forward to a city council special committee meeting of the whole on Monday.
Okay.
And then we're hoping council can adopt a resolution to endorse the plan by November 17th.
Okay, thanks for the update. Ms. Ishii.
Thanks for that, explanation of the procedure. So, as I understand it, we've had this nice session to come and look at this plan. Now, let's say we want an action on this plan. Let's say that we'd like to see Curtis Road change to that dotted gold like High Cross Road is there, maintaining the rural character. Is our best bet to do that, to talk to our city council member and have them not endorse this plan until certain specific changes are made?
That's correct. But we have already got the approval from the other agencies for the plan the way that is presented. We can put that as documentation from the city of Urbana. But going back to change the whole vision of the plan is going back to all the boards again. And we don't have time for that. We need to give the document to the Federal Highway Administration in December.
Ms. Hoyle.
I have a quick question about that. Because we do updates to the plan before we redo the plan. So as you stated, when would we then have the opportunity to make those amendments going forward? What's the timeline?
Once the plan is approved, if any agency wants to do an amendment to the plan, that can be done after the plan is approved, need to be discussed in QAT's technical, QAT's policy, and get the endorsement from all the agencies.
And then it can be, but it can't just be done by Urbana, it has to go through.
It has to
and
be voted by
everybody
all
else
the
has to
agencies.
vote
That's
on
what
it.
I meant when I said that, yeah.
But we could offer an amendment that the rural character of Curtis Road be maintained in the future design.
If you want to do that, it can be done after the plan is approved, because at this time, going back, we will not have enough time to get the plan to Federal Highway in December. The other thing that I want to mention is that the Curtis Road, the way that is presented right now, we don't have, as I mentioned, a design for Curtis Road at this time. We are proposing a corridor study, and we extended the study area from there to Illinois 130, that a corridor study can be done and define better the way that it was done for the northeast corner of Urbana, to better define what the community wants for that portion of Curtis Road. Then a corridor study is what is being proposed.
Okay, and so that's what's number 6 there is Curtis Road corridor
Number
study.
6, but if we do a corridor study, I would like to extend it all the way to Illinois 130, that is considered the whole section and not just that small section.
And you could apply for funding to do that, and that would give us the opportunity then to define the character.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Mr. Barislas.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I like that concept a lot, because it does strike me that if that one piece of Curtis that really runs through the university is, if we don't have the university's cooperation in changing it, well, then there's no reason in Urbana building, a bit much bigger, larger version of Curtis on our end. It really all matters together holistically. And so to study that and talk about what character is appropriate to
Exactly.
not encourage development, but to make it safe, I think could be looked at all
Yeah.
holistically.
I can tell you that at this time I'm working on preparing a scope of services to try to get funding for that section, and I did it from First Street to Illinois 130
that's
to encompasses the whole area, because just that a small piece cannot
Yeah.
be studied independently.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Mr. Rusk.
So at one point in the conversation, there was discussion about, interaction between CUATS and the Sustainability Advisory Commission, the Climate Action Plan. So we do address transportation. One thing that that could be interesting as as an action, or something that we could do together as a collaborative, if that works. Some of the limitations that we have in climate action planning and dealing with transportation is, among our body, is, limited expertise in modeling transportation effects on carbon emissions. And then the other thing is that in our particular context, we're not able to, or we haven't, and we haven't had the expertise to consider all of the other kinds of benefits. So when we're talking about incorporating actions, strategies into the climate action plan, sometimes there's a constraint, whether explicit or implicit, on what's the economic benefit of that. What's the bang for the buck in carbon emissions? And so if we're able to, I don't know, I hesitate to say harmonize, but I'll just say that. If there's some way that we can kind of reinforce each other and have some cross-reference, and that in the climate action planning process, when we talk about possible transportation projects that have CO2 emission reductions potential, that we can lean on other benefits, and that we're not constrained by, well, this project is very expensive and CO2 alone is not a good reason to do that. That would be really helpful, I think.
We have been working with Scott. We have provided data to Scott, and even we had several meetings to see if the greenhouse gas models that we have in place was something that you can use, but you need to use a different system. And then making them compatible is not possible, but we can see what we can do. We are open to work with you guys.
In addition, I'll say it's been really difficult for us too. We have limited air quality monitoring stations in the area. We have only one, and it's located in Bonneville currently. And it's not something we have jurisdiction over. It's the EPA's air stations that they have to figure out where they want to put them and then fund them to get installed, et cetera. So that's another limitation that it would be great to work together to try and overcome.
Ms. Hoyle.
Just quickly to follow up on your comments and my input tonight for the sustainability plan, I suggested that you add 2 items in. One would be that Urbana develop a pedestrian action plan, and 2, that we create a Smart Trips program or a similar program. This is a program they have in Portland and they've now implemented in Chicago, where you facilitate people shifting modes through a variety of incentives and information and encouragement programs. They did it first in Bronzeville, and they're now doing it in another community that's name slips me right now. But I think those are both things that we as a community could undertake doing that fit a lot of the other goals that we have on a broader scale and for sustainability.
Can you repeat the name of the second item?
It's called, Portland pioneered this, it's called Smart Trips, and they pick a geographical area of the city each year. They mail out to every residence in that area a set of options that they can choose. They can get more information on how to walk for transportation, how to bike, or how to use transit, and they provide incentives for that. And so they send back in a little card saying, I would like to learn more about how to bike. And so then in Portland, they deliver that information to them by bike, and they give them things like coupons for showing up at a business on bike. So you get a coffee if you went over to Common Ground on your bike. And it helps people start making those changes in trips with an incentive, which works amazingly well. Even though we know we're being manipulated by a free cup of coffee, we still do it because it's fun and people enjoy it. And once they figure out that they can then make those trips through those means, then they are more likely to do it again. And I think here that would be particularly helpful for some people who are afraid of using transit, to have some ways in which they could do that that would make them feel comfortable. Bicycling's the same thing. A lot of people are not comfortable if they knew what route they could take and things like that. And that's the kind of information that's provided in those packets. In Bronzeville, I could get more information about how they've done it up there, but they picked economically distressed communities, and that's where they started, and it's been wildly popular. They have slow bike tour trips. They go around and they like do sort of a flash mob on a business and go and all bike to some place and then go there and buy coffee or food or whatever. And so they're really fun and people like them, and they actually do help facilitate mode change.
I want to just address Ms. Ishii's concerns about Curtis Road, which I think are well-founded. The comprehensive plan shows Curtis Road as being major arterial from High Cross to, I don't know, somewhere out there. And then the rest of the way is minor arterial. The land uses around it to the north are residential suburban pattern, which is single family, bigger lots. But that's what the plan says. And then there are some notes on here that it specifically says Kuwat's High Cross Road Regional Transportation Plan link. So there's an explicit connection made there. And then carefully consider roadway design to be compatible with South Farms uses. So that's what this plan says, just so everybody knows. I don't know. I think it's essentially what the long-term plan says. So.
That's what we consider.
So we're shifting to models?
Does anybody have anything further, any other questions or comments? Mr. Bowersox.
Maybe one very quick one. I really appreciated the creative public input session with the graphic facilitator and the artwork. I just think it's always tough to get people to come to public input and to stay engaged, to give input, but I really appreciated that you made that creative, different effort, and that so much of the plan really does talk about sustainability and some of our community's values. I appreciate that. So, there's a million details we can always nitpick on and talk about and keep working on as a community, but thanks it's clear a ton of effort went into this and that it really was grounded in how do we connect our community with these important decisions.
Thank you.
Well, I'd just like to say I do appreciate all the work you've done.
Thank you, Ms. Dick. Yes, thank you very much, and thanks for the good discussion with all of us.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the feedback.
Thanks. So are you going to see the models or not?
No, I think we're good.
You're good? Okay, we are good too.
Okay. Thank you for that. That concludes the study session, I believe. And unless there's any audience participation, is there anybody care to address the Joint Commissions? Please come forward. Mr. Smythe.
I'll have an opportunity to address this plan on Monday night, but I do want to point out there's one inconsistency in the plan. If you look at page 159 on the LRTP, number 7, Curtis Road improvements between Illinois 130 and Race Street, choices 2035. This segment of Curtis Road is proposed to be constructed as a 4-lane section to match improvements made on Curtis Road from Staley Road to Prospect Avenue. Okay, so they're calling for the same thing that now exists, that Mr. Trail referred to as, basic. There's nothing out there.
Yeah.
They're calling for a 4-lane road here.
Right.
So, and yet all the comprehensive plan, the conversations that we've heard here, all say a 2-lane rural They're talking about two-lane rural with complete streets, bikeable shoulders or wide shoulders and sidewalks. That's different from what it says right here. This is what the other agencies have approved, and it's, according to what we've heard tonight, what is written here is wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else care to address the Joint Commission?
Can I clarify that?
You may clarify.
I agree what Charlie is reading, but that's from the 2035 plan. And as I mentioned it, at this time, and putting together a scope of services to do a whole corridor study for that area. And that's why in the 2040, we are not proposing any specific design for that roadway. We are doing we are proposing a corridor study. Initially, the university proposed to have the corridor study just done on that small section that is pink.
Mm-hmm.
The scope of services is being done between First Street and Illinois 130 to define better what do we want for that area. What he read is coming from the 2035 plan, which is the previous plan.
Mr. Bowersox?
Yeah, maybe that makes sense. Maybe a small clarification there in the wording so that the sentence could say, in the 2035 plan, it was a 4-lane arterial. In the 2040 plan, we're undergoing a study to evaluate the appropriate cross-section or something. Just so that it kind of mentions, well, it was this way, now we're considering which cross-section works, so that it isn't confusing about what's really being proposed in the new plan.
Yes, and we will do that change in the document.
Okay, great.
Mr. Roberts?
So the plan that's being brought forward and is very comprehensive, and it's obviously taken a lot of thought through different agencies to compile this. And we, the city of Urbana, will be looking at the plan, but we're at the same time we're heavily indebted to the input of other agencies, in the Champaign area, and it's like it's a very wide-ranging plan. And the question has come up. I mean, I've been listening to the conversation here, very thoughtful conversation. And if the community of Urbana sees weaknesses in the plan as far as the direction that Urbana wants to go, and Mrs. Stake was talking about the absence of interurban rail, as even a concept. If it can't be added to the plan as a vision, if this is a vision plan, that's very upsetting because. Yes, you can have a vision, and it's possible that in the future the consciousness of the United States government will change, and there can be funding by in 2040. So I think it's a weakness not to include the best vision in the plan, and it sounds like the expectation is that the City Council will summarily accept this plan because there's really no way of changing it without going to 5 bodies and convincing 5 agencies that have already signed off on it. Apparently, Urbana is going to be one of the last agencies to sign off on it. So what's the point? Basically, the City Council is being asked to rubber stamp something that we as a city won't be able to massage into something that matches perhaps the vision that we seem to have, and I think is probably the correct vision for the future. So if the city body of Urbana has enough problems with this plan that they don't want to endorse it, what is the situation that occurs? And I don't know what the vote's going to be, but I'm just asking.
You got a question for Mr. Roberts, or?
Well, I believe it's still in the public comment period, and the point of that is to make comments so the plan can be modified and improved, like was just suggested in one location. So I think that's the point of our meeting. It's not to rubber stamp, it's to make comments. And there'll be further comments, I'm sure, at the City Council and from the public at large. So this is not a complete document, it's a draft document. It's a complete draft, but it's not done, correct?
The public comment period ends tomorrow, and as I mentioned, we are taking comments, but significant changes to the vision, significant changes to the plan we need to go back to all the agencies. We didn't consider rail, and I agree with you, will be really great to have rail, but we went through an extensive public comment during the 30 months of the plan. And people don't call for that. They requested high-speed rail, but they didn't ask for rail inside the community. We base the plan on input from all the agencies and input from the community. We received comment from more than 1,500 people. We took all those comments into consideration as we show. Based on that, we defined the pillars for the community, and we defined the projects for the community in consultation, in cooperation with all the agencies who are members of QATS. We had steering committee meetings every month with the agencies to discuss the process of the plan. And that's why at this point, we felt like the different agencies have provided substantial input during the 30 months of developing the plan. And that's why at this point in time, if we need to change the vision completely to include new things, we will not be able to do it without, again, consultation with all the agencies. All the agencies at this point have given the approval to the plan. They feel that this is the plan that they want. If Urbana doesn't want to approve it, that's fine, but we need to have the majority, and we need to go with the majority.
Could I say something? Well, you know, at one time, Illinois had trains to every single small town in this whole state. And what happened was the oil companies and the car companies didn't want them, so they bought them up, and then they tore them out. So we could have had this if it just wasn't for that, because there was, at one time, trains to every single small town in Illinois. It's just a shame, that they were so, greedy.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you.
Yeah. Ms. Ishii.
Yes, thank you. I understand what Rita's saying, that we really can't redo the plan at this point, but there is some wordsmithing that I think absolutely must be done, because you just stated that things that were from Choices 2035 are not necessarily any longer a priority. But on page 155, it says that some of the regionally significant projects from the previous plan have not been funded or constructed, but are still high priority, noted with Choices 2035. Now, Mr. Smythe mentioned something on page 159, I think he said. He may have had an older draft. It's actually on page 166 for the record. And on page 166, with that Choices 2035, it calls for a segment of Curtis Road to be constructed as a 4-lane section to match Curtis Road from Staley Road to Prospect Avenue in Champaign. Anything but bicycle friendly, I can tell you from riding that regularly, and not a rural nature either. So I think that there is some wordsmithing needed here. It's not clear to me at all that these things are no longer a priority for 2040. In fact, it looks quite the opposite, that they're a higher priority because they're left over from 2035. And if you read the first paragraphs on page 166, that's pretty clear what it's saying.
Those kind of changes are not significant changes. And as I mentioned, at this time, we are requesting funding to do the whole corridor study. You can send me your comments, and we'll do those changes, and you can see those changes probably by Monday when we come back to the city council, as Brandon requested. We can do those changes, but changing completely the vision of the plan to include rail, that's something that we cannot do at this time. The section of Curtis Road, I agree with you. Probably we copy exactly what was in the 2035, but it was decided at the probably 3 months ago when we had the meeting of all the agencies to call for a corridor study. And as I said, I'm working on the scope of services. I extended the area to consider the whole area, and we don't have an idea. And I can show you the scope of services. It's basically done. We are calling for doing a lot of environmental analysis before any kind of design is proposed for that roadway.
Mr. Trail.
Just very quickly, I have no idea what other agencies have said about rail or anything, but I do know that the one public session I was at, it was discussed quite a bit. Now, the only specific project that was discussed, because it was the only one anyone knew about, was high-speed rail, but everyone was in favor, almost everyone at the public session was in favor of more rail. Now, the fact that I don't think any of us thought it was going to happen anytime soon, and probably we were, not, but I think it's not exactly accurate, at least from the public session. I have to say that people weren't asking for rail or interested in rail. I just think no one's heard any public proposal of projects that they can get behind or say I'm in favor of or opposed to. So the only one's been mentioned, anyone's ever mentioned, been high-speed rail. So, I don't think it's quite accurate to say that no one asked for rail.
I said they asked for rail, but they asked for increase on Amtrak trains, and that's one of the projects that we propose, and for high-speed rail. And those are the two projects regarding rail that we included as part of the vision for 2040. But we didn't hear or have comments written that says we want rail as a system in the community. If that was said, I missed that part. People talk about high-speed rail and increasing Amtrak service, basically. And that's what is reflected on the graphics that were done for those meetings. And for the ones that we did, the public input that we did with the bus, we have the documentation that people, what they wrote on the surveys that we did.
Ms. Hall?
2 comments. I think that Urbana has to change its comprehensive plan before we have a solid case to go forward and say that we don't like what's in the long-range transportation plan, because our plan is calling for it to be a major arterial. I don't think that's what the community wants anymore. And so I think we need to do some housekeeping ourselves in order to make a strong case. And just by point of information, when I moved here, we were having a discussion about a light rail, a trolley system here. The transit district wanted to do an alternative study, and they were soundly beaten up. And that project never made it past the point of saying we should do a study. We never even got to looking at what alternatives and whether or not it was viable. So that's part of the reason why I think you're not seeing it included here, is because it was a very ugly and unpleasant conversation, and people were really very nasty about not wanting to discuss that. And so I think people even hesitate to bring it up. I personally think we need one in our high-density areas. We are essentially operating as a light rail system on our high-frequency corridors for transit, and we are at capacity many times of the day. The buses are stuffed completely full, even with articulated buses on those routes. But I think we need to have that conversation again in the future, but I think that's part of why it didn't come up as an idea for conversation.
Mr. Engstrom.
Just a quick note on the Curtis Road designation and the comprehensive plan. On the mobility map, which is kind of what we go by for the different designations, it does say minor arterial. It doesn't say major. And it also says then major collector, which is below arterial. So this is the map we use for our official designations. I think there might be an erroneous note on the future land use maps.
I'm not sure I read it that way. And I looked at that map too. I think for about 3/4 of the run it's blue, and for the last quarter it's red, so that means major arterial. Is that right? Not?
No, it's,
Not on the mobility map?
yeah, not on the mobility map.
Okay.
It's, yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Bowersox.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a brief comment about the light rail thing too, because I also, back when that was discussed, was looking at examples in Portland with Portland Streetcar and elsewhere that looked really appealing and like a great fit for our dense college campus core. And I'm sorry that, didn't come to pass. I guess in my mind, the best strategy for Urbana at this point is to support the MCORE project that really will upgrade us to a bus rapid transit type scenario, which will have stations and shelters and stops and easier, zero grade platforms to step on and off the buses quickly. I think bus rapid transit is going to be a great improvement here, and that core facility will be excellent. And I think over time, Urbana has to think about, okay, if these first segments of that work well, how to extend bus rapid transit to the other places in Urbana that are the key traffic generators, the key, educational or job or housing spots that for Urbana's economic development we would want upgraded transit in. And so hopefully the green lines in this map, in this plan, will over time in Urbana get extended to other key points. And maybe if bus rapid transit proves to be successful here, then that infrastructure would be the basis for someday saying, you know what, it really does make sense to use a light rail type modality, because we already now have stations and stops and a real urban dense core that's connected with frequent transit service. And so now we can switch off of tires and onto rails. But I think for the time being, bus rapid transit is the mechanism, the vehicle maybe, for getting us there, and we should be part of that investment and be really strategic with how we extend that into Urbana. So who knows, maybe in our lifetimes we'll continue down the path of slowly getting ourselves to the transit-oriented core that we envision for our community.
Mr. Trail?
I guess I have a tiny bit of confusion then. If this really is, and I'm not familiar with it at all, if it really is bus rapid transit or even heavily bus rapid transit influenced, I would have expected to see that term in here. This is a 25-year, you're talking about something relatively near term, but this is a 25-year roadmap. If we really think we hope this is going to be a successful experiment, why wouldn't the next steps be envisioned here in a 25-year roadmap?
I worked with the transit district, and I worked on the grant application, and the previous ones we didn't get funded, and spent a lot of time talking to FTA. Two things. One, we're not using bus rapid transit vehicles as defined by FTA, Federal Transit Administration, so it's not technically a bus rapid transit system, because those are different vehicles. And the other thing is we had a lot of difficulty in trying to get funding through FTA, and finally went with the Tiger grant application instead, because we don't fit their models. They want long corridors, straight corridors, and we're building a system. We have an interconnected street system. It doesn't fit their models. So we could not get funding through the grant programs that the Federal Transit Administration has, and so that's why we went with Tiger, which is enormously more competitive. And we were astonishingly lucky to get that grant funding, and MTD and the cities, everybody worked really, really hard, because we don't fit the models. And so what we're doing here is ahead of a lot of what is being done in the country, and so people don't really understand what we're doing.
And that's the reason why some of the terminology that you want to see is not in the plan.
We do
Just
have some trains.
Last little comment, though, that I find that to be, it takes years to work this kind of funding. It takes, and I'm assuming that part of what's going to militate in your favor is that you've shown a long-term specific interest in exactly this, and been trying to make your case and how it fits in your long-term plan, and how you're going to decrease road traffic.
That's why we got the grant.
I'm a little surprised to see there's a lot of specifics about road. There's some specifics about regional rail. There's really no specific I noticed there was a couple mentioned raised platforms and things, which made me think bus rapid transit, but there's no specific mention of anything. No specific projects, no.
Well, we have the 4 transit hubs that are shown on the
I
vision.
do have a question about what those are and how they're going to work.
It's basically what you want, but we don't call it with that name.
So you have a 4-stop bus rapid transit system
No,
in
what
mind?
we have is 4 locations, and this has been discussed with MTD, 4 nodes in the community where will have terminals, but the terminals will be basically mixed-use development where we have transit-oriented development. But because the limitations that we have with federal transit when submitting grants, because the way that we are developing, we are not calling that transit-oriented
So
development.
you're
We are calling
saying this
transit
is,
hubs.
so you're saying this is such a highway street funding focused document that you were afraid to mention the term transit-oriented development?
We had to submit 3 times the grant that for which we receive funding to be able to get the funding.
That's a different issue. I'm saying here,
the
in
plan-
this document, you're so worried about not something that you feel you cannot mention the term transit-oriented development in this document?
You can mention the term transit-oriented development, but when we submitted the grant, we didn't submit the grant as transit-oriented development. We submitted the grant as a Tiger grant that has another function.
I understand that, but it's a separate issue. I'm talking about this document, the document that we're here to discuss.
Well, I'm telling you,
You're
when we
saying you
submit,
cannot mention the term transit-oriented
Just a
development
second,
here?
Mr. Trail. I actually closed the study session 45 minutes ago,
Yeah.
and then we did audience participation, and the study session broke out again. I appreciate it.
You
It's-
do? I'd like to say one more thing.
Oh.
Well, you know,
Let her
when
rip.
I first came to Illinois, we had trains, and we could go to Chicago, and we had a nice place to eat and everything on the trains, and then it got so there was no more. You know, it was, then we only had, we had lots, we could go about 2 or 3 ways. Then it got less and less and less, and then, by gollies, it started up again. And so now, for a while there, we could get on the train and there'd only be 3 or 4, or maybe 15 people. But now, it's filled with people because everybody likes to get on there and go, and we do go. So there's a possibility, you know, that we can get things going again because it's really good now. You can get there. I like to go on the train. And I think it's good for a lot of people who, well, now I'm getting so old I don't want to drive anymore, so it's nice for us. But they don't have the nice food and stuff on it like they used to have. They used to have a really good dinners and things, and now it's not so good. But,
Just sandwiches,
But
yeah.
but it's nice to get on.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So thanks for letting me talk.
I'm going to say that we're, once again, close the study session. Thanks. It's a great discussion, and it's what makes Urbana a strong community is, people who are passionate about
Yes, what? It's terrible
the things that we care
don't
about.
have it.
So,
The whole
unless there's anything
country should
else,
have it.
I'm going to say that we're adjourned. All right, thank you.